I want a boy and a girl, and I want my boy to be born before my girl because I want the older brother to be able to protect his little sister. Someone replied to that and said, before your son was even born, you've already tasked him with a job of protection.
I disagree that there's an expectation that the man should like carry the household financially. Making a really general prescription about women's general psychology is a bit much for me right now. I think that's too general for me. Because I'd agree with you, society shouldn't be okay with women like being physically violent towards men. Society shouldn't excuse Amber Heard. Society should have had a stronger reaction to Cardi B like assaulting people.
This. So I want Fanatic, if you can start from the very bottom, right, or the top, I don't know, whatever. And explain your full thoughts. So our friend Katie, because Katie wasn't here for the whole thing, I don't think. So yeah.
Sure. I guess in a nutshell, first off, my name is Fanatiq. I stream on twitch.tv/Mr. Fanatic, and we kind of engage in political conversations, social conversations. I think I focus more on politics, but I think social stuff is still relevant as well. So I'll foray into that every now and then. I think the conversation started, I was kind of just like offhandedly saying, but I wholeheartedly believe a society does not hold women accountable, like in general. I believe that like as a society we have like had a habit of constantly coddling women, and as a result of that coddling, women don't hold themselves accountable. In relationships, like I've heard so many anecdotes from so many various people about the various ways they try to like explain to their girlfriends or their significant others or their wives or whatever, like different situations where like they're clearly in the wrong, and for them to ever just say I'm sorry without at first indicting men or trying to shift the blame to men in some sort of way, or just doing everything they can to be in every form of denial ever, it seems like that like they just can't just simply say you were right, I'm sorry, or any of those kinds of things. And I think
See that as a societal feature of like women and not just like a certain type of person.
I think it is more commonly found just in women in general. Yes, it is. I would say it's a societal feature of women. I do think that obviously, anytime you start talking about the human condition, I think that it's very easy to obviously say that there are exceptions to the rule, or like even things that are normative, like just something being normative can be 51% of the outcomes are this way, right? But like it doesn't mean that everyone is that way. There are more personalities that are going to be even more stubborn in that regard, or more resistant to accountability. But overall, I would say that women in general are not held accountable, and therefore don't hold themselves accountable.
Okay. What can you specify what do we mean by being held accountable? Because I did hear, and it's like I heard you talk about Amber Heard in the past, right? So I don't think that the type of accountability that you talk about when you talk about Amber Heard is the type of accountability you're talking about now. Because the example that you just gave is like they can't even say that they're fucking wrong. Like I'm explaining why you did this wrong thing, and women aren't even like introspective enough to like figure out maybe there's something wrong with me. Maybe I'm at fault here. And that's like a very different type of accountability than like you don't get the starring role in a film, right? It's very different like scales.
Sure. So accountable.
Before you guys continue, do you guys want this? I want to ask you this now before people come in. Do you guys want this to be an open panel where people can come in and also give their opinions here, or do you guys want to have a one-on-one?
I think it might be best if like the two of us talk about it first, and then afterwards maybe then we can add other people in. Otherwise, it'll be way too hard for us to get into the mud about like what each other's positions are and everything, I would think.
Okay. Okay.
I'm
All
fine
right.
with that.
All right. Go ahead. I'll lock the room. Go ahead.
Sure. So I would say accountability. I just looked it up on Merriam-Webster, and it says, well, subject to giving an account, capable of being explained. Let me see one more. Let me look for a better one. Oh yeah, a statement explaining one's conduct. A statement or exposition of reasons, causes, motives, a reason for an action. Yeah, so I guess without so those are the denotation, right? And I would say like ultimately, like in my head, if I wasn't looking at the definition, I would say it's holding them, it's making them responsible for the thing that they're doing, and having them like admit to like a wrongdoing. I guess I'm typically using accountable and some sort of like almost like an implication, right? To where it's like when you've
Yeah,
done
I,
wrong,
I agree.
being able to say I was wrong, being able to say I am responsible for this, and here's where I'm responsible for it. I would say that's probably
Yeah,
what
so
it
I
is.
think what you mean when you say accountability, because like if like the definition that you brought up, I don't think really reflects what you say. I think you more mean like being able to take responsibility or even like bear the consequences of your actions when you were the one in the wrong, right? That's the vibe I get from you when you say that.
Hmm.
Um, I don't. I hope that's accurate.
Sure.
But then again, that still doesn't really answer my question, right? Of like, because what being held accountable would mean very different things under like different contexts, right? So if you're
Obviously.
giving the example of like, I've heard like anecdotally about a friend of mine trying to explain something to their girlfriend when they're clearly wrong, being held accountable for that would be different than what Amber Heard would need to like the scale of what being held accountable is, right? You know?
For sure, there's going to be different scales for different types of actions, but and obviously the different forms would be different, right? But ultimately, accountable is the same thing, right? It's like being able to acknowledge and recognize that like your actions are something that you should be responsible for. So I would say that like while like maybe the scale is different for Amber Heard, the principle is identical. The Amber Heard should be able to recognize what I did was wrong. I lied on this man. I came up with this story. I was abusive and all of those things. But she'll never ever admit that. She'll say, oh, I only abused out of defense for someone else. She'll say, yeah, no, I was misrepresented and lied. She'll do everything she can to never actually admit that anything she did was wrong. And I find that to be like, I think that's the case with, frankly, a lot of women
But that's
nowadays.
but that's where I think the argument kind of falls apart, right? Because I can take an example of many like criminal men who have been convicted criminally and they won't admit that they've done something wrong. Like I don't think Harvey Weinstein is sitting in his like prison cell all like, oh, the
Hmm.
things I've done wrong, right?
Sure.
So it's kind of like I get that you see it as like something bred across like women, and I would just argue that certain types of people like especially criminals are less likely to like take accountability and responsibility for their actions and like show remorse and like regret it or something like that, you
Okay.
know.
Yeah, so I totally agree with you. And I think if we start looking at like specific sections like criminality and things like that, then yeah, we'll find people who are significantly more reluctant to like hold it to be held accountable. And I think and obviously when you start talking about like or examining criminals and things like that, then you're already looking at like a lower sect of and a lower class of society, right? Like lower functioning, lower health individuals. So then in that case, yeah, then it makes sense. But what I'm talking about when it comes to this women thing is that it seems like even in cases where there's no criminal complaints, we're talking about like something. We're talking about yeah, just well-to-do normal citizens, right? That aren't doing like something like yeah, whatever, like those kind of people. They have a hard time doing it. Like you can say criminals won't take accountability either. I'm saying women in general won't take accountability in non-criminal
and
situations.
and it's like I get that's what you're saying. It's just that like it's really important for me to like knock this out now because I feel like a lot of the time the conversation you'll talk about this like you've indicated at the beginning that you just mean that you see just like a general what I would call anecdotal thread and like your experiences that women just seem to like lack that introspection or like that ability to take responsibility and you have like a theory behind that.
Mm-hmm.
But then we always bring up like it always get muddied up like the your theory by like bringing up Amber Heard, which I'd argue that her accountability is not you know she did criminal things. She's an abuser. Like I don't think the thread that you're saying and are like trying to talk about is the same as like someone who's an abuser.
Oh,
You know,
sure. Well,
like women just generally sucking at like taking responsibility for their actions,
well, sure. I
right?
guess maybe let me walk you through it because I'm not sure how much of the conversation you saw. So I'll walk you through it. The reason why we even brought up
Mhm.
Amber Heard, because we were talking about the fact that not only do women not hold themselves accountable, but society doesn't hold women accountable. And I think the way of demonstrating that is to show different ways that society refuses to like look at women the same way that we hold men, right? Like when women do wrong things, and we will like make excuses for and coddle and justify. But when men do wrong things, and we'll say, "Oh no, what he did was awful," like, and we'll just like outright condemn. And it seems like almost every condemnation of women that I've like almost ever encountered in my life has been like couched in some sort of justification and some sort of excuse. And so I think so I think a perfect example of that, because it's something that's relevant and in pop culture right now. That's why I brought up Amber Heard, because like we saw, like when Johnny Depp was accused, the way that they responded, literally not off of any proof or anything, off of an accusation. They took away his roles and jobs. They literally canceled him. He hadn't been able to find work for a year and a half. When he came forward with evidence proving that Amber Heard was actually guilty of being abusive and had admitted so in actual recorded audio, they responded by saying, well, we don't know for sure, and she can still work. It would have to wait until it goes to court. So for her, there was a higher barrier of a court requirement, whereas for him, simply the idea that he was accused was enough to take away his livelihood. There's a total difference and imbalance in the way that we hold men and women accountable. I think that's a perfect example. If we obviously, just on that situation alone, would you say that society at large was significantly more ready to hold Amber Heard hold Johnny Depp accountable than Amber Heard?
See, I was kind of hoping to like get off that example, I guess, because I do want to talk about like what you or what I thought we kind of reached. Because if we're going to talk about like, I don't think I think Johnny Depp and Amber Heard is a good example of, I guess, the way, what irks me most about like the Amber Heard thing is like her, because I didn't follow the trial at all. I don't really care. For me, it's just two people who abused each other, and so they're both not great for me. One was more of an abuser. That's fine. People have toxic relationships, whatever. What
That's a perfect
bothered me was
example.
that,
I love it.
why?
Because I feel like, again, this is another thing right here where it's like she was clearly absolutely toxic. There's no evidence of Johnny Depp's abuse. There was all of this evidence of her literally admitting to her abuse. But instead, what we find is everyone's trying their best to say, it was both of them. It's both sides. It's really not that, whatever. And again, where she was wrong, the things she was doing, there was evidence of fabricated Photoshop. There was evidence that there weren't the actual scars that she was claiming took place. There was evidence that the things that she was claiming on the days when she was saying that she was getting abused, they had recorded audio of her admitting that she was the one actually doing it. But instead of us being able to step back and say, okay, we had it wrong, it wasn't all Johnny, because when it was Johnny was accused, it wasn't that they were saying, oh, it's a both sides thing. They were saying he's evil, he loses his job, she's a victim, elevate her voice. Now, when it's the other side, it's, well, they're both bad people. They're both abusers. I think really there's a blame to go around. Like, let's spread it around a little bit. I don't really think we should take sides because she's wrong. If the role was reversed, and we had originally accused Amber and then found all the evidence that Johnny was having, we would have probably, as much as we could, to castrate this man, and she would have been the beacon of whatever the freak, right? Like, and it just seems like everyone always is trying their best to make every excuse and refuse to hold women accountable, like you're doing with Amber Heard right now.
Okay. So the reason why I didn't want to get into this example is because I don't feel like I'm the best example for like people who were outraged about whatever Johnny Depp was fucking doing when she was accusing him of that stuff.
Freak. I can't play another game. I'm done. I'm so sorry. 1 second. Discord froze.
I don't really. So we can talk about it. But I also think that it's kind of like, I don't think if you're going to make a societal prescription about women, talking about the relationship of two hyper celebrities who are super rich and famous and had like a troubled relationship is a very strong argument to make. Because the issue for me, and why like a lot of the times you and I come at odds, is because you're making a big claim here. Women are societally more likely X. Women are more X. And then your example is like Amber Heard. And it's like, when you're saying women X, that's not really me or any of the women watching Prime or most women in general, right? And when you're saying that's the quintessential example, it's really not. And it's also not what you're talking about.
But okay, so first off, that's a completely unfair retelling of what I said. Never ever did I indicate that this was a quintessential thing. I just said it was a very current and popular example. Number one. Number
You
two,
said it's a very good example.
it of course is very good because it's current and popular. So I never said it was quintessential in any
Okay.
capacity. Very good and quintessential are entirely different things. So no, I've never indicated that in any way. I
Okay.
opened up the conversation long before we got to Amber Heard, speaking about my own personal anecdotes, or just speaking about the general conversations normally that are around cheating and things like that. I said specifically, for example, when a man cheats on a woman, then they will say, men do this because men have these urges and so on and so forth, and he's awful and so on and so forth, right? When a woman cheats, then the conversation instantly becomes, well, what is he doing that's not fulfilling to her such that she would feel the need to cheat because women don't cheat for no reason, right? And I've heard those kind of excuses made whenever we're talking about the exact same action. Or, for example, a woman can hit a man and she can be hitting on her, and people will say, well, she's getting frustrated because of all of these things that he's doing and so on and so forth. But if that man hits her back, then obviously the immediate response is, you should never ever hit a woman. I mean, never. And so I feel like almost always, whenever it comes to man, we are very comfortable just coming up with these formal declarations of things that should not be done, and as aphoristically as possible. So it's like, you shouldn't do this. A man who does this is awful, or such and such and such and such. That's all we'll do. But whenever it comes to women, it's like, well, I mean, how do we get to these situations? It's not like she's doing it for no reason. Women aren't naturally that, and we look for every justification and explanation, and that's where the difference happens. So we started there, and I just so happened to remember that one of the most watched court proceedings ever, in which there was an obvious known female abuser, was a perfect example. And I think that's why I mentioned that. It's not that this is the quintessential. It's not that this thing is necessarily relevant to every other situation. It's just, I think it's a very apparent and apparent example that everyone saw.
Okay. So when you said very good, you meant it in the sense like this is a relevant example, not as in like this portrays like exactly what I'm talking about.
Well,
Okay.
no.
I
Yes, it
understand.
does portray exactly what I'm talking about in that specific sphere, which I don't think that there is some sort of crazy difference between the two. And maybe you can help me with that. What would you say is disqualifying about the Amber Heard situation in displaying the societal attitude towards accountability for women? What is disqualifying
I
about Amber Heard
I
specifically?
don't I don't think it's disqualifying. I just think that when I just said, "Oh, you don't think it represents what you're talking about." What I mean is like the interpersonal dynamics, right? And this is what I kind of asked you beforehand as well. That's like I think if you're going to talk about domestic abuse and how women are not being held accountable in places when they are clearly physically abusive or not clearly when they are physically abusive, I think that's very different than talking about a situation where women are bad at like taking responsibility for being wrong at an argument between just like partners that she didn't wash the dishes. Like those two things are not really the same to me. So they can't all be brought down under the umbrella of women can't take responsibility or women don't know how to be accountable or society socializes women to not be held accountable.
Okay.
Because I'd 100% agree with you that society is fucking awful at making women accountable when they physically assault men. And I think women are way too sexually aggressive with men they don't know they can be because they're much more comfortable putting hands on, for example, which we're not okay with the reverse, right? So
Hmm.
I do agree in that sense that society is awful with that shit. But if we're going to talk about stuff like cheating, that's not really the same to me. Do you get why?
No, well, there's a few things that you said. First, you said the thing that would somewhat make it. You said it wouldn't be disqualifying, but the reason why you didn't like it or something was because of interpersonal dynamics. What does that mean?
Yeah. It means that like in a situation as and this is kind of like the problem because the way that you see the Amber Heard like Johnny Depp relationship is not the way I see it. So when I say that is a very messy relationship where both people are abusing each other, you hardcore like disagree with that. And because we have that disagreement, then any discussion that we can have, for me, that's like an interpersonal relationship between two abusers that we're just famous and now everybody knows about it and it's very cringy and weird and like shouldn't
Wait,
have happened,
none of these.
right?
None. First off, okay, even okay, if they are both abusing each other, um, and we responded to Amber. I mean, we responded to Amber. I mean, to Johnny's abuse accusations by completely removing him from all of these successful roles, and we responded to Amber Heard's accusations by continuing to elevate her career. Then what about their interpersonal dynamics? I mean, tell me how
Mm,
their interpersonal the personal dynamics affect that obvious correlation in any way.
okay. So I am not a caster in Hollywood. So I didn't do anything for both Johnny Depp and Amber Heard's careers.
I
So
didn't
you
say
can
you.
say that
I never said
Hollywood,
you. I said society. I said society. Like the way
you said
society
we. Yeah.
responded.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, what I'm saying we. I don't have. I've never employed Johnny Depp nor Amber Heard. Obviously, when I'm saying we, I'm talking about we as a society. Like the way that there was all of this vitriolic response to Johnny Depp. Please don't get so bogged down
No,
in
no,
little
no.
details like that.
So
Obviously, I'm saying like
the
what
reason
the
why I
companies
did
that
that
be.
the reason why I did that is because I don't think the companies at B are necessarily a very reflection of society. I don't think that with the hate wave that is currently hitting Amber Heard, there are many people who want her to be employed. I don't know why she is. You know what? It's
Well,
like
she's
you
not
and I were on
now.
panel together. Okay.
She's not now. She's finally losing those jobs. But my point being, at the time when the accusations originally came and then the tapes were released in which it was very obvious that she was admitting to physically abusing Johnny Depp, the response from the accusations against Johnny were for him to lose his job and be unemployed for a year and a half. The response to the accusations against Amber Heard were her continued employment, and it seemed like there was no punishment to her whatsoever. So to me, it seems like society, since I don't want to use the word we
People
and get hung
didn't
up on
believe
that,
her.
it sounded like
Believe it.
society. Right. Now, how did people only um, believe accusations against Johnny, but disbelieve her own admission in actual released videotapes? So then again,
Well,
so but and here's the thing: if we chose to believe the accusation against Johnny, but not to believe against the allegations against her, this is yet even more evidence of our refusal to hold women accountable because we weren't even willing to take serious his accusations. Perfect example,
okay.
one yet again.
So I think it's actually a bit worse because I don't think it wasn't that people didn't believe. It was that it was kind of like dismissed as like, oh well, if she abused him, it must have not been that bad. Or what you would say that she would say was like in self-defense, right? So she was the first one to give the accusations, and then it's very easy for people to be like, oh, then it's self-defense if she abused him back, right? Um
That's not how that happened, though.
we
It wasn't that he said, "Oh, you did yours in response." She admitted to abusing him, and from the obviously from the tapes, it looked like he was saying, "This is why I've never hit you. This is why I walk away, and I don't. This is why I don't want to be there. This is why I do this is because you hit me. You hit me, and I don't believe in hitting in relationships." And she was saying, "Well, the reason why I hit, and so on and so forth." So there was all of this admission to hitting on her end, and it seemed like the tapes fully exonerated Johnny Depp. We now see that he was exonerated, obviously, when they went through this entire lengthy trial, and they did everything they could to provide all of the evidence, yet they didn't submit the pictures because they were obviously doctored. They couldn't substantiate any of those claims, so Johnny Depp was not held liable because she did have a countersuit for his own stuff, and Johnny Depp was not held liable for any of those things. So now at this point, despite them going to court and all of those things, we have all of the evidence that he was not physically abusing Amber Heard, and despite all of that, we still were willing to castrate this man's career, right? While nothing happened to Amber Heard when she was accused. So again, and you said it was dismissed because it wasn't that bad or it was self-defense. Johnny Depp was never given that assumption. So yet again, when it happened to the
yeah.
woman, we immediately were willing. I mean, when she made her accusations, we immediately took it serious. When he made those accusations, as you said, it seemed like people were willing to say it's not that serious. So yet, this is a shining example, right, of of the fact that society does not take the allegations of men against women seriously, and they don't hold women accountable through every example I can provide here, right?
Yeah, so it's very lucky that this turned out the way that it is. So now we can take men's more seriously, right?
But I don't think I don't think that will happen. I don't think that I don't think a single situation where one person who happened to have video evidence proving this thing. I'm sorry. Yeah, no, yes, video and audio evidence, an admission from the other person. If it wasn't for the fact that they are so incredibly highly publicized individuals, so then the lawyers were able to look and say, you said you were attacked and your nose was broken on this day, yet here you are the very next day with no scars. Well, I wore makeup. Where's the swelling? Ice made it go down. A broken nose? Literally nothing? Okay, so that happened to be just the circumstances were lucky enough that he happened to record so many interactions, that they happened to be in so many public galas where there were pictures and things in order to exonerate him. Otherwise, we would have nothing to go off of, and her narrative was clearly already successful, and he would have just had to eat that. And so I don't think that for the average person that they'll have such luck. I don't think they'll have the benefit of multiple recording and multiple galas and all this other nonsense. So when a woman comes with these accusations against men typically, then that's just going to be they're just going to have to eat that, as we've seen through this Me Too movement on many occasions where there's like evidenceless prosecution of individuals.
Yeah, we talked about that. Like in sexual assault cases, there's just not many evidence to be had. I'm sorry. So it is a situation like that. It's just how it is.
Yeah.
You know. Okay. So we are now talking about domestic physical abuse.
No, well, the original conversation, this is just an example of a way that women won't be held accountable. But we would really, still at the very root of this conversation is a conversation about accountability. If we want to leave the Amber Heard conversation, we can just go and talk more generally. For example, again, I would say when it comes to like a relation, like a family not surviving, immediately the conversation goes on. Like if they're like economically deprived, the conversation is specifically on, did the man provide, right?
I think that's like another divide that we have that is kind of weird to say, but I think I'm not. I think a lot of your examples, and you've said so, that a lot of them come from like from the Black community, and I just don't
No,
have
I didn't say
that
that.
insight. You know,
I'm
I
not
think
saying.
you did in the panel that we were on, but maybe I'm wrong.
Okay,
I just feel
if you
like
heard that, I'm telling you, I'm going to correct that narrative really quickly now. No, I'm
okay,
not saying that this is specifically within the Black community. I think
okay.
this is pretty pervasive. I think it's generally like the impetus is on the man to be the provider provider for the family, which I don't think is a problem. I'm pretty conservative myself, but again, this
Yeah,
is a
I think in my
responsibility on
circles,
men
that's
that's
not
not.
really. See, but then I'd have to be like, look, in my circles, nobody is asking if the man like provided enough. That's just because I'm pretty progressive myself, you know. So that's just not the conversation that is being had.
I don't
And
believe that
then we'll
that's true.
just have. Uh, I feel like that's a bit unfair because I didn't go and say, "Oh, that's not true that people in your circle don't talk about men being providers,"
Well,
right? And I
sure. I
could
would
say that,
imagine.
but I don't. This
I
is
get what,
weird.
but yeah, but it would be really weird for you to say that because we obviously recognize that there is a societal expectation that would probably fall in line with what the data supports, that the vast majority of males are the breadwinners in the vast majority of relationships. So that is possibly one because of the expectation that males should be the providers. So males are doing whatever they need to become the providers, and I would say that automatically makes most people think that it's the male's responsibility, considering it is the role that he's fulfilling in the vast majority of relationships. So if I'm
But
telling you
most
that and then you
families
say,
have
I don't think
two
it's real.
people working.
Yes,
That's
and the man is
not
out
very
earning
accurate.
them. No, no, I'm sorry. What you just said is not at all contesting what I'm saying. Yes, two people can be
Okay.
working, and in most of those cases, the male is out earning the female. So yes, they can both be working, but the male is the breadwinner, and therefore the majority of the financial strain falls on his shoulders. And if that family was to fail, then for economic reasons, the male would be blamed in most cases. Do you not think so?
I think that a man can out earn his wife and still not out earn her significantly, where the burden of like the breadwinner comes from him, you know,
That's not an
because
answer
like
to my
most
question.
families.
That's not an answer to my question.
Okay.
The
I'm
question,
sorry.
the
How
question,
is it not?
because the question was, It's given that males are typically expected to out-earn their female partners. Do you think that if a family failed for economic reasons, that the average person would probably say that it was the male's responsibility, or do you think that they would say it's the females?
I disagree that there's an expectation that the man should like carry the household financially,
Okay, so I guess we're just living
right?
in a different reality. If we were to look at polling data,
Yeah.
if we were to look at polling data about women after having children, if they expected, or if about women being married, if they expected their husbands to out earn them, do you think that that's true or not? Do you think that they do or they don't?
If they expect it,
Yes, if they expect a man to
um,
out earn them, women looking for potential partners, do you think that the polling data would suggest that they expect their husbands to out earn them?
I think they probably would want to. Yeah.
Not just want, do they expect? I don't have
Expect
to.
as in they're looking for it in a potential partner?
Ye-
Probably. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, good. So if that's the case for most women that are pursuing whatever, then it would probably stand to reason that society at large would also expect this to be the thing, especially since it's already the occurrence. Come on, I don't know how we're fighting over this.
No,
Obviously,
wait. You didn't say most women. You said women after giving birth and like having children. So
I'm
it's a bit different.
I'm saying even women without children that most of them expect the man to out earn them. Do you not think that to be the case?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I
Well,
think it
so we're
is
just
the
living in
case in
different
conservative
realities.
circles.
Fanatic, it might be helpful if you give us an example. So you give us a vague scenario in which a family fails for financial reasons. Maybe if you help narrow it down, then like the response could like we can better imagine what the response would be.
Prime, I am sorry. I think I've spoken in the most general terms because we have the most general data that clearly proves this point. I don't think beleaguering it by trying to get into some individual specific nuance when we can't even agree with the general broad prescription that men should be the breadwinners in most relationships as the financial strain falls on them, especially from somebody who literally believes in a wage gap, aka Katie. I don't know how we're even here. So let's just move past that. So when we're talking about relationships, when it comes to cheating, have you ever heard someone make the justification that in order for a woman to cheat, then she must be unfulfilled in her relationship in some sort of way? So the man it must
Yeah,
not be doing
for
something. You've
sure.
heard that. Okay, so that
Yeah.
do you think that there is even though sex is obviously a two-person activity, do you think that the onus is on men to be more sexually advanced and more sexually skilled than for women?
Okay, can you say that again? I think I got a bit lost.
Given that sex is a two-party activity, do you think it's fair for me to say that the onus is that there's an expectation on men to be skillful more so than women?
Sexual? Yeah,
Oh,
probably. Yeah.
okay. So I mean I don't know how else to I mean can I would probably say in most areas there's an expectation of responsibility on men more so than women, and I think that expectation and those responsibilities are why there's all of these things to hold men accountable for, because there's an expectation there. If two people are sexually incompatible, they're more likely to say the man is failing in some sort of way, right? Whereas it's
Yeah.
rare. It's
And I and my point would be not that, oh, women should be held to the same standards and like being told that maybe there's something wrong with them. I think we shouldn't like shame men for that. Or I think that if a man cheats, he's also probably unfulfilled in ways, and that's why they cheated. I think both sides are like that,
But
just
that's
the
not the
other way
going.
around.
But that's not the pervasive narrative. More often than not, when they say men cheat, it's just because men have a biological urge to spread their seed, and they just have higher sex drives, and so on and so forth. And they're not cheating
I
because
think
of
that a
sexual
lot of
interest.
pervasive narratives are wrong and harmful, and I
Sure,
want to combat against them
I love
because
that
they're
you're with
wrong.
me then. And I think that pervasive narrative is, I think, something supportive of the original argument that there's some lack of accountability when it comes to women. Because in this case, when it comes to men, when a man cheats, it's because of low moral character and him not being able to resist his urges. Whereas when a woman cheats, it's more so about the fact that she's being unfulfilled, which is the duty of the man. So it seems like this is another perfect example. I get that it's a bad narrative, and I get that it's something pervasive, and you're with fighting that with me, and I would like that you fight that with me. But I think before we can get to fighting it, we got to get to admitting it. And it seems like at every step of the way, you're willing to make all the concessions. Yeah, we hold men accountable here. Yeah, we give men the responsibility there. Yes, all of these things, the onus is on the man. But I don't think that we're actually not holding women accountable for any of these things. Women are just as responsible for like sexual compatibility. Women are the one that do the majority of the consumer spending. They could be responsible for some of the financial strain on relationships. I think the women can also very much contribute to a sexual experience, but very often they just feel like, oh, my presence is enough. I think
So
it's crazy.
maybe I should like clarify. I've never said in this conversation, nor do I think generally, that women shouldn't. All I said was that I think that your claim is problematic. Um, and
Oh,
I would
tell me
like
why.
when
Tell me
I'm
why.
making it, I explained why, because I think that when you make a very broad general statement like women are X, and then we pull different things like cheating and domestic violence and the Amber Heard thing and a bunch of different things that you think bolster your argument, I think actually, for me, it makes it impossible to agree with your argument, right? Because I would say, I don't think women should be excused for cheating on their partners. That's pretty cringe. I'm not for that. Like, if you cheated, it's just not very, that wasn't a very good act that you did there, right? I'm also less focused on like holding people accountable. I think that's a very interesting way of speaking that I don't really understand, because like holding people accountable like socially and morally kind of seems pointless. Um,
But
like I don't really understand it. So it's not that I disagree with you that like I came on panel with Prime to yell at Doobie because Doobie thinks it's fine when women hit men, but he doesn't think it's fine when men hit women, you know? And, so that's very cringe. It's not okay that we normalize women like being physically violent with men. I don't care if they're just scratching them. Okay?
okay, but
Like
hold
that's
on.
not okay.
So far, it seems like you're saying that you think the statement is bad because of the various examples I've been giving to try to demonstrate where this thing can apply. And I think that's obviously ridiculous. I think accountability is something that's very broad that could apply like to all of these various areas, right? You can be accountable for like your diet, accountable for your parenting, accountable for your relationship, accountable for your freaking for just your civic duty, accountable at your job. Accountability is
Yeah,
a
but
very
you're not
broad term.
actually saying what being accountable means.
We went
Like,
through. I'm sorry. Yes, we. Yet one, I am because we went through the definition at the very, very beginning of this thing. Secondly, I can only make broad statements if we're talking about accountability because we're trying to talk about accountability as it applies to society, right? So I'm gonna have to be pretty broad in that way. I don't think that's fair. And then second, and then lastly, when you're saying like, yo, you're not telling me like, I mean, I don't like the idea that we do this, or I don't like that this thing happens, so this is a problem. And it's like, well, sure, maybe you're a person that, like me, recognizes this is a societal norm that probably needs to change. But that's the whole nature of the conversation. Not about my personal preference or my personal beliefs or yours, but more about whether or not there are societal expectations that align with the description that I'm giving that specifically they don't hold women accountable. And that's what we're contesting here.
okay, but, and we'll get there eventually. So you're saying holding accountable is what we went over the definition, right? It just
Mm-hmm.
means being accountable for your diet, being accountable for how you raise your kids, which again, like being held accountable for how you raise your kids could cost you your kids. Being accountable for your diet could just be like your friends bitching about you. And this is kind of what I mean with scale. Like when you use a term like being held accountable for something, because I worry about optics is not the right thing. I worry about how people are going to interpret a statement like that. I have to be very careful before I endorse it, right?
Okay, sure.
Because for some people, holding women accountable could be like, I'm gonna hold my woman accountable, and she's gonna get a kick-ass thing when I get back home, because she
Sure.
cheated. Okay.
Okay.
So do you get what I'm saying?
100%. If someone made that accusation earlier, or not that accusation, but someone made that claim or that point earlier. They were specifically saying
Yes,
that like
fine.
some bad actors can take what I'm saying and use it for very nefarious things, right? And I think
Yeah.
that could be said of like so many things. If a person wants to do bad things, they can take even the most like innocuous statements and try to find some way of justifying some really heinous actions. So I don't want to ever be held responsible for that. I think I have to be careful with my rhetoric to make sure that I'm saying things clearly. I feel like I've given enough exposition such that it shouldn't be really easy for a person to come to some sort of nefarious interpretation unless they intended to. But I think here's how we could probably proceed, because I've given you these examples. For example, when I mentioned the celebrity thing, you said that that was too specific to celebrities, but then when I made the general statement, you're saying it's too broad. So then my question is, what do you think would be a good example? Like, what would be the type of examples you would think should help you to understand where I'm coming from, or at least should better explain what I'm trying to say?
Mm, okay. So let's say that a woman cheated. Okay. She's in a committed relationship and they cheated. What would holding them accountable in that situation mean? What would that look like?
I would say so. Personal accountability would be the woman admitting that what she did was wrong, admitting that there is no justification for it. I would say, and trying to do whatever is necessary to repair the injury caused by that indiscretion. And I would say that that should happen for both cases, for a man that does it and a woman that does it. I would say that that would be what
Okay.
accountability looks like for me.
Okay. But that's personal accountability, right? And I
hmm
can't make
I'm not talking about me as
individual
in
people act out.
wait, no, no. I'm not talking about me as an individual. Like I'm again, I'm talking about like just that any given person should do it that way. That's what I'm saying.
No, I understand. But like
Okay.
when we're talking about like socially holding women accountable. And what you just described is like, what should the individual that did the bad thing do? And
Sure.
I can't make individuals do anything. I'm sure there's a
Sure.
lot of like man cheaters who don't do what you said. And you said
Understood.
both should do it, right? But
Right.
I'm asking like, so socially, the friends, the family, people who know about like what does being because what you just told me is this is what would need to happen. The person who did the bad thing would have to do introspection and soul searching and then like apologizing and then trying to do good. And I'm like, okay, I agree with that, but I wouldn't say that's a women's issue. I just think people who do bad things should do that, right? So I'm asking like
Yes.
societally
Okay,
or
okay. So societally, what I would say is we should probably stop looking to justify it. We should probably abandon justifications like, "Oh, well, yes, then that man must be unfulfilling. That's why she cheated," or, she's not happy, and every woman has a right to be happy, and he's not making her happy, and things like that. We should probably stop whenever a woman does something. We shouldn't seek to recriminate and then justify by recrimination. That's what I would say. We should avoid that at all costs and focus on first, like making the statement, "This is wrong," right? Like I would say like
okay,
those kind of declarations. But it seems like almost every time we as a society look for justifications.
okay. I mean, I don't. I guess I disagree with that a little bit because I just think that, like, I think cheating is wrong and I think it should be condemned. But I also don't really have an issue with men being afforded like the same compassion and empathy that like women are. Like, I think that if a man cheats and they're in a committed relationship, they probably weren't very fulfilled. So I don't, and I understand that there's a pervasive narrative that like man just can't keep it in their pants. But I also think that's a very bad narrative for men. Like I don't think it's helpful for men to think about themselves that way or societally that way. Um,
Sure.
so
Okay. So then it seems like so. My original statement was just that we don't hold accountable, like society accountable. So do you agree that that is something that does happen when women cheat? That we tend to look to justify or recriminate as opposed to condemn?
uh, I think that's too general for me. So if it's a yes or no, then I would have to say no. But what I would say to like make up for that is that I do think that generally, societally, there seems to be a much more empathetic approach to talking about when women do bad things. Um, You know, there's always like looking for what you said, you know, always looking for the reason why it's actually not her responsibility to not have done what she did, or like it's a lot more empathy driven. And I do agree that it can come from like an infantilized place of like,
Sure,
oh,
but
she, like kind of what you called out Prime for. These
yeah,
like, oh, these women, this guy's a predator. It's just,
but again, we're talking about society, and your foremost attestation to what I'm talking about is specifically that I'm being general. How is that fair? What can I give you? You're asking me what is a general thing that society should do,
no, no,
and then when I give you the answer, you
okay.
say it's too general.
No, no, no. So the our disagreement does not come from like the generality. It's just that you use language that I already explained that I'm unwilling to use. So I don't think that we necessarily disagree. I just think that it's fine that you find that you feel like how you speak is like responsible and that your rhetoric is fair. But I wouldn't speak like that, so I have to like reserve judgment on that, you know,
Okay,
because I
how
do
would
think there's a harmful element to it
then tell me that
that I
sentence that
can't
I
fall
said that
into.
was too general that you would like to maybe repurpose to fit to more align with, like, I guess your ideology. What, like, because I
Um,
don't know if it's semantics or if it's just my verbiage. It sounds like that's what you're indicating. So tell me, how would you like it to be phrased to still communicate what I'm trying to communicate, but that is more befitting for your ideology?
I thought I did. I think that we generally approach like with some issues, we definitely have a much more empathy driven like way of seeing and conceptualize women doing bad things. And I do think that a lot of the times it can't come from an infantilizing place. How if you hear Doobie talk about women being physically violent, you fucking know it's because he's infantilizing the shit out of women, right? So uh so it's really not a problem. So I do think that with a lot of cases, and you see, it's mostly just caveats. Like I wouldn't say women are X. I would say in some cases, or in a lot of cases, um, we have a way of conceptualizing things that women do in a way that is infantilizing towards women, that does remove like agency from their decision making. And I do agree that a lot of the times, um, like we would take socialization and use it as an excuse over like the self-determination of the individual, right? But I actually think we should do that with men as well more. So this is like
Okay.
it's
So
a problem.
that was going to be my next question. I was going to ask you, do you think that we are more empathy driven with women than we are with men, for sure?
Absolutely. It's awful.
Okay.
It's really bad.
And to be infantilizing is to kind of remove away a bunch of the agency and things like that from people, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
for sure.
So then it does. Okay. So then, yeah, it does seem like it's a semantic thing, because I think to say that we're
Hmm.
empathy driven and we're infantilizing and removing away the agency, I would say that agency is absolutely necessary for accountability. You would agree with that, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So then if we're removing the agency from women, then we're definitely removing the accountability. And then even in the places where we should be holding them accountable, we're more empathy driven, so then we're unwilling to do so. And I totally agree with you. I totally agree that as a society that we are that way, that we're very empathy driven, and it's coming from a place of coddling. That was the word that we kept using in that panel earlier. But I would say that a society that has brought women up in that way, like, I think it creates women who now have normalized not being held accountable and therefore can't hold themselves accountable as well. Do you think that that might be true?
Um, I think socialization is pervasive, so I think it would be a bit silly to say that that has no effect.
Sure.
Um, I again, I resent the phrasing, but I know why you're saying it like that. So
Okay,
I guess
let me do it.
in a way.
Let me fix it. Let me fix it. Do you think that the infantilization and the empathy that society, like, kind of gives to women would create a nurturing such that they wouldn't develop the skills of, I guess, their own personal agency and looking at their own actions objectively, but they would instead seek that same sort of coddling and self infantilization in a way. and justifying their actions? Do you think that that's probably realistic?
That's really tough because I think it's a really big jump, I think. Um
I just I'm saying because society infantilizes women,
no,
that
I
a
know,
lot of
but
them
it's
will
kind of
self
like
infantilize. Because you just said yourself that that socialization is pervasive, and so
yeah,
they've been socialized
I
not to be condemning of themselves. They've been
but
socialized to infantilize.
you're asking me, do you think women, the way we socialize women kind of mean that like a lot of women, like millions of women don't have the ability or like really struggle with the ability to like not self-infantilize, right? Which like it's going to be like a tough ask for me because
Well, you
I
just said socialization is pervasive, and that it would be realistic to say that the socialization would lead to these specific outcomes. And so the socialization that you admitted to or that you agreed to was specifically
yeah,
that.
but it's not like a one-on-one thing, you know? Like it's not like men are socialized to be more aggressive than women, so
Do
men
you
are
not think
like
they are?
I do. Can I finish my
I'm
sentence?
sorry. Go ahead.
so, so I do agree that men are socialized to be more aggressive, but I think that the ways that some men can be aggressive, I don't think it's like a one versus one translation, is what I'm saying. So I think docile men, that millions of them exist, not all men are like violent brutes that are aggressive, right? But I do think that socialization can still come in different aspects, right? So I think many shy guys can be more assertive as a way of like demonstrating that socialization. So what I'm saying is, when you're saying if society is kind of infantilizing to women, doesn't that mean that women infantilize themselves? And I'm like, no, I don't think it's like a one-on-one
No,
comparison, you
so,
know?
so you're saying you can have an entire society that like has a pretty pervasive culture of infantilizing women, yet none of the women will actually learn to self reflect whatever the behavior the society is doing?
No, I never said like excessive pervasive. I agreed that
You
we
literally
just
used
have
the
a
word
general,
pervasive.
and
You
I
said,
agreed.
okay, this is nuts. I don't know. I don't know. We might
I
be in an
agreed that
impasse.
we have, we've made so much progress. You don't even know. Um, I agreed that we have a tendency to like approach bad behavior, like moral behavior, I guess, or not just okay, bad behavior in general. I take that back. In a more like empathy driven, like way that is also infantilizing. But I don't think, how do I say? When you talk about self infantilization, what you mean is just like, I see women who are clearly in the wrong and they're not saying they're in the wrong. Is that what you mean?
Well, I would say infantilization in the same way that you were using infantilization. And I took it from the sentence that you were saying that infantilization was a way of, again, like using too much empathy. I think I wrote it down. It being very empathy with women, being very empathy driven with women, such as so that they're avoiding condemning women for the purpose of, I mean, and which is infantilizing. So in the same way, women would be very empathetic to the words of themselves. They'd be very empathetic towards themselves to the point of um, avoiding condemnation, which would be self-infantilization. Maybe I won't use the word self-infantilization, but okay. So if there's a pervasive element in society in which they are avoiding condemnation, um, because they are incredibly empathy driven towards women, do you think that women would then grow up and themselves be very empathy driven when it comes to considering their own actions and be avoiding condemnation as well, as that would be learned behavior and habit formed by society?
I think so, but I also don't know if I would disagree that men have that because I see it as more of like a cultural, like a generational thing
But you
that a
said
lot of younger people have it.
But you
So
said earlier that like we already this empathy driven perspective was specifically towards women much more than men.
yeah, when they do something bad, I
Yeah.
agree.
So then, if that's the case, then yes, while I can say that there are some men who be raised and babied by their mothers, and coddled by their mothers, and infantilized by their mothers, and would really struggle with self condemnation and accountability. I'm not saying that this is like something that like can't be trained and learned or whatever. So yes, some men can have that. I'm saying that it's more broadly applied to women because society more broadly applies that empathy driven infantilization towards women.
See, but
Right.
that's really interesting because I don't think the example you just gave about that man, like being coddled by their mother and stuff like that, I don't think societal socialization works like that. It's societal. So that man is absolutely still being socialized in a way that is that has like the general narratives to men. Like that man as an adult would still be told that they're like, I don't know, they're not a good breadwinner or something like that, or that they didn't please their woman, or they would be told to like man up or something,
Yeah, and it's the
right?
complete. I've witnessed this happen in plenty of cases where you have these people who have grown up in these households with these completely overbearing, coddling parents that have like told their children that they were like God's, God's gift to the earth, and never were
Yeah.
really whatever. And then you see how difficult it is when those people reach adulthood and they are confronted with a harsh world that does not have the same the mother's love towards that person, and they start holding them accountable, and the kid is complete, or this now young adult male is completely ruined by like this experience. We've seen spoiled people. We call that spoiled, right? We've seen spoiled people that literally cannot be confronted by a harsh world that's not willing to give them the same passes. Like,
Yeah, but I think the difference is, again, is that while I do agree that societally, generally people agree with what you just described, I think we are wrong to be presenting a harsh world to people. Like, I think we should act with more empathy
well,
to both sides.
well,
Like,
here's
I
the.
don't think it's overly empathetic.
I,
Um,
well, with the women, it is. If it's infantilizing, then it's probably inappropriately and inordinately empathetic. And I would say that yes, while I want the world not to be necessarily harsh, I do think that condemnation is necessary, and condemnation will always be somewhat harsh. And it takes you building up a tolerance to recognize that you have to hold yourself accountable. And I think that tolerance is typically developed over a long time, especially with men as young boys. When you're told to keep your hands to yourself, or when you're told you have to fit in a society in this specific way, even if you're one that wants to get up out of your seat, or if you want to do something bad, or if you want to play fight with your friends and they've told you not to, and things like that. We've recognized like how like a lot of ways when boys do these things that they're significantly more likely to punish young boys. Like classroom environments are a lot more harsh towards boys who are a lot more active, or at least want to be more active, and things like that. But you're required to sit for long amounts of time, and when you're struggling with that, you're going to be punished, and so on and so forth. So I feel like all throughout your life, society is doing that thing. Another perfect example of that is I remember us making like a example I gave on the thing is where, we say from the very beginning, like we like it's like you say, oh, people say I want a boy and a girl, and I want my boy to be born before my girl because I want the older brother to be able to protect his little sister. And it's like already someone replied to that and said, before your son was even born, you've already tasked him with a job of protection. Like it's crazy. Little girls just get to be, and little boys are expected already to do something, right? And I think it's almost unavoidable. Like when you tell someone he's the man of the house, and the man of the house is required to like keep order and protect their, and so on and so forth. Like this is a thing that
this is a
happens on
bit
a
of
regular
a
basis.
It's a bit of a tangent, but I think it's very interesting that you said that like the guy's already like tasked with the job and little girls just to get to just be. Because I think
Absolutely.
that's a very like no, because I think that's something that I would have to like absolutely disagree with you because we understand that little girls don't just get to be. There are a lot of expectations, social expectations, what it means to be a girl, and they start from a very very young age. So while there is a great example to what you said about how like people want the boy to like protect the girl, to say that like little girls just get to just be, I think is like a blind spot. But I don't think it's too related to like the original topic, so we don't have to go down that rabbit hole. I
Sure.
don't think.
Sure. Let's not.
Um, what I'm trying to think if I can like cave in on this. Mm, Mm. Talk amongst yourselves while I think.
Okay. I'm gonna
I
just think myself.
I have a something else, another path uh to argue with Fanatic about. I'd rather not do it myself. Hopefully, I can get Katie to do it when you guys are done with this thing.
Okay.
But I want to keep the space. Um, yeah, I don't want to say it yet because then she's going to distract from what you guys are talking about at this moment.
Yeah, I'm gonna tell you this. I don't feel comfortable like caving in on the last point right now, but I will give it thought and see if there's a way we can like cross the bridge on that. Because the reason why I'm hesitant is and again, like because we agreed that it's mostly like a semantic issue. It's not actually that we disagree a lot. Um, but when you say women have internalized this thing, so now women generally seem to have like struggle with like an ability to take accountability,
Hmm.
um, or like introspect. It's a really like big claim for me to make. And I don't think it can be just substantiated by the fact that like society generally tends to infantilize women more, so therefore they must have internalized there and they're self-infantilizing. And I know we talked about how you can use a different word, but I just don't. It's too big for me to be able to cross that bridge. But I will think about it. Um, and maybe I'll come around on that. We'll
Sure.
have to see.
So here's the deal. I think for me, again, it's not like this thing is necessarily going to happen, but I think we all know that like socialization and nurture is significantly like impactful on a person's outlook and on their social values. And I would say that like accountability, like holding oneself accountable and being willing to condemn one's actions is a social learned value. I think we are probably naturally like prone to kind of want to distance ourselves from like from accusations. I mean, I think a perfect example, obviously, I'm a pretty religious man, but like with Adam and Eve when they ate the fruit and God comes to them and is like, "Hey, what are y'all doing? Like, y'all naked? What's going on?" And like Adam's first thing is like he asked, "Did you do it?" And he's like, "Yeah, the woman that you gave me, she gave me the apple and I ate." And her first thing is, "Well, I mean, the snake, the serpent, he's the one that gave me the fruit. Like he told me to eat it and I ate it." Like in accusations, I think it is a natural learned behavior. I mean, I think we probably do have an inclination towards like wanting to try to distance ourselves from any forms of like admission of guilt or anything like that. But I think again, society kind of breeds those things out. But if society has this recognition that like they need to like hold men accountable, like and we're doing that, but we're not doing the same thing to women, then women aren't going to develop the ability or the experience in recognizing when biases are kicking in and all of the defense mechanisms are kicking in that are preventing you from being able to honestly look at yourself and say, okay, nah, this is I might have messed up here. I think that's a
I
natural thing.
understand. I think where the struggle comes in is that I'll be willing to agree with you on like a lot of societal prescriptions, right? And but I think what I feel like is that you want to hear or like expect to hear like the response, like the personal accountability of like you because I'd agree with you. Society shouldn't be okay with women like being physically violent towards men. Society shouldn't excuse Amber Heard. Society should have had a stronger reaction to Cardi B, like assaulting people. You know, I would agree with all of those prescriptions. But then when we're looking for like individuals to be good people, that's like a different type of like requirement that I don't feel comfortable like dabbling in, right?
Well,
So
but that's not what I'm doing here.
because
Because I'm not talking about like what about an individual. If I was going to recommend for an individual to become a good person, I
no,
would tell
because
you,
you're saying you're like we're agreeing on the societal prescriptions of like society shouldn't tolerate this, society should do this, society should say this, and then you say, and because society isn't, women are now acting in a certain way, and once you lower it to the woman thing, then it's more about like individual responsibility, and that's the part that I'm not willing to go down. You know what I
okay,
mean?
I get it. If so, listen, I can't. if you're just saying, listen, it could be true that this is happening, but I'm not willing to consider it. I don't really have a win here. There's not, it's not about a win, but I don't have any way of kind of dissuading you from that position. Like I
It's
think we
not about
can,
considering it. It's
well,
more just about like I wouldn't say
admit that
men
it's
are
obviously
something.
true. Well, I mean, we do it all the time where we'll say, like, for example, we can say that, like, lower economic people are more violent. Like, we can say that. Or we can say that, white people in Appalachia are going through the opioid crisis, where there's like a large amount of drug addiction in rural communities, right? We can make these kinds of statements. That doesn't mean that every
But
individual.
that's a very different statement. That's like they're not comparable in terms of like the conjecture you make there, right? Because like
Also,
the inner psychology of what women are after like socialization is not the same as the fact that like Appalachia is going through an opium crisis. Like there's like statistics there and like study and like factual things that are happening versus like we're having a theory that because we understand that society has a general inclination to infantilize women, so now we're saying women are lacking some introspective skills, right?
oh,
And I'm
okay.
not saying that that might not be true to some extent. I just don't. Um, I just can't say that that's true.
So, so
That's very general.
I think this is where we're running into
Again,
a problem here then, because what I'm doing again, one, I'm looking at like obviously my own personal experience and I'm saying this thing, and then of course I'm like starting to look at like conversations, like obviously on YouTube and things like that. There's a lot of panels and things where they have these conversations between men and women and things like that, and we're starting to see these things happening. Then you look at your own relationships, and I look at some of my experience with my own mother, or siblings that I have. I have a pretty humongous family, or you start whatever, and you start engaging in conversation with other people, and you start to really, I mean, I'm not the youngest, you know what I mean? I'm around 37 now. I'm about to be 38, and I look at it and I think about just my life experiences and like the different things that I've seen over all these years, and you start coming to head with this realization, like, wow, hey, this is just a trend. I guess I was looking at this person as an individual and this person as and then I start realizing, this is pretty commonplace, and I think whereas what I'm doing is I am making a general descriptive claim about like the state of being, or like some behavior that I guess is kind of like normative within women. And I think we have all of these recognitions of like the justifications and the reasonings behind that, right? Again, we're not just only condemning with women, but we're going first into, well, how is it getting there? Where is society causing these things, and so on and so forth? And that is, and I think it makes sense to do that when you're going to talk about something as broadly as sex. I don't know how you can say we can speak broadly about society, but we can't do these same sort of broad statements about women, half of society. It's crazy to me.
no, I wouldn't say about women, right? Because and this is kind of what I mean. So I'm not saying that you can't like take anecdotal experiences and then like build certain like see certain patterns or have certain understandings or even like just everyone grow up in their own cultural pocket and those experiences are all valid. It's just like if I took all of my personal experiences, I could make a lot of statements about men, for example, that I would not feel comfortable making about men generally, because I understand that like my own personal experiences don't represent all men. Probably not like the amount of men that I met is probably like less than 0.5% of men that like exist. So making a statement like men are something
Hmm.
would be very
But this is a very
unreasonable to me.
this is a
You know,
hyper reductive recount of what I just said. Because if I was only talking about my
I
personal experience, that would be one thing. But if when I start talking about my own personal experience and we start looking at more societal examples, we obviously start looking at data, like the difference in criminal justice as it applies to men versus women for even similar crimes. We obviously recognize that, like within our criminal justice system, men are hyper penalized. When we start looking at advantages given towards women when it comes to like the court system, right? Like for child court, family court, right? When we start looking at advantages given towards women within divorce courts. So if we look at all of these various things, we start seeing how men are disproportionately the recipients of like brutalization in different ways from police officers and all
right,
these
but
different kind of
there
things.
are other explanations to that, and
So
that's where confirmation bias also is in the way,
I
right?
don't think so.
So
What would be the explanation for why we give women lesser sentences for the exact same crimes? aside from empathy?
I don't have an answer to that.
Okay, so
I
there's
think
not
I
better
could.
answers to that. So like that's my whole point. You just
No,
said,
no, no. Just because I'm incompetent at explaining a point doesn't mean that you're right. That just means that I'm incompetent.
well, hold on. But
But we can
you can't
talk about
disagree with my
divorce
point and then
courts,
say, but
okay?
there's other answers. And then when I ask you for them, say I just don't know what they
Wait, wait,
are.
wait, wait. I didn't. I said we can talk about divorce courts, for example, if you want. I can't defend the why women get lower sentences. I don't have the information on that. I feel like that's extremely good faith. Like I'm not gonna argue about something that I don't know.
Okay.
So I don't have to defend that, right? Like it's like it's not sure, take it. I don't think that's
I hear you.
I think that's a bit weird.
No, I get it. If I think that these things are evident, and I think I just gave you a plethora of reasons, I mean, of examples that I think lead to this conclusion, aside from my own personal anecdotes and my own, what do you call it? What's the freaking word? I can't think. Just my own empirical experience, right? Like I'm not going to be
But do you
basing it on
think
that. But when I say, hey, so now I have my personal experience, and we have all of these obviously pop culture examples like Amber Heard, and we have all of this data that clearly demonstrates it, and you're willing to concede the knowledge that we do infantilize women, and we are very empathy driven towards women. When you see that, I know that, you know that, we all have these properly basic like knowledge of these experiences and things like that, and when I'm supposed to somehow kind of say like, yeah, but I don't like the generalization, like what the freak are we talking about? You know it, you've seen it, you're admitting to it, but then you just don't like the conclusion because it feels uncomfortable because you don't want to hold women accountable. Because what this really amounts to is its own form of condemnation. I'm saying women are doing this thing and this thing is not good. And you love all of the data, you love all of the facts, you love all the societal prescriptions, I mean the societal description about what society is doing, but then you just hate the final description, the final condemnation that women are just not holding themselves accountable as well. Like that's the conclusion, and you love all of it except for that, because that involves holding women accountable, and you can't do it either. This conversation is a perfect example.
I think that if you think this conversation is a perfect example to what you're talking about, I think that's a great example for me for confirmation bias. Because
Sure.
a lot of what I've been doing in this conversation is building a bridge and agreeing with you on things and like, but to say that I love the data and I love everything you're saying and then come to the conclusion that like at the end of the day, I'm just now willing to take accountability, I think that's a bit, I don't know, it's weird because I know you've been listening to me, so I just like maybe you're just unhappy with like my reluctance to go all the way. I don't think that me at the end of this conversation saying making a really general prescription about women's general psychology is a bit much for me right now. I don't think that's me not being willing to take accountability. I
I hear
think
you.
that's very I don't know, that just doesn't seem reasonable to me.
Okay.
Um, but that's okay that you feel that way.
Okay. Dokie. I mean I mean that is genuinely how I feel though. I think
That's
when
okay.
all of that stuff is there, and if you can see all of that stuff, but then just you don't like the final condemnation. I don't know. I have no other way of describing it.
I don't think that you using your anecdotal experience plus
Here you're being reductive
other
again.
examples. No,
Plus
no,
plus
I'm
plus
not done
data.
talking.
Okay.
Wait, what do you mean plus data?
Again, when I was talking about specifically when
We're
it's
talking about the prisons, right?
uh,
So just because, so when you take that example and you're saying women get less sentencing or women get more favorable, like results in divorce courts, right? And I said,
mhm.
well, I can't argue one of this. I can argue about your interpretation of the data of the other thing. We can do that. We cannot do that. Doesn't really matter. The data is there that there's a disparity in the results. That doesn't mean that it confirms your like opinion. The data is
Yeah, you're
being
right.
interpreted by you in a
Abs-
certain way, right?
yes, it is, and I think once you start running into so much data, right? I could see if like there was some sort of like just a few small points, but I think when you have a plurality of data, I think at that point the idea that I would still be charitable enough to sit here and start denying the fact that this thing is very evident in all of these various aspects of life, the thing that you intuitively know, the thing that you've already conceded to, or maybe not concede is too strong of a word, it's too combative a word, but you already agreed that yes, this is something that society does. So now, when I'm starting to give you specific examples of that, maybe you can disagree with a few of those examples, maybe. But again, I only mentioned those other things because it seemed like you were trying to make the idea that I was just appealing towards my own anecdotes to describe this phenomenon that you admit is happening, that I know is happening. I don't know. It seems weird to me. Like it
No, I
just
understand. I wasn't saying that you're just using your anecdotal experience. I'm just saying you saw certain patterns in your personal life and then you expanded outwards and you start collecting more examples to how it's valid. Just in the same way that I saw a personal trend in my own life and then I started looking outwards and there's like philosophy majors and sociology majors writing articles about the experiences that I had, right? There's data outside of us and we like base our perspectives on that too. I'm not saying that like, oh, you just have anecdotal like evidence. I'm just saying when you're saying there's data, the data exists, but you're interpreting in a way that also fits with your narrative. And I'm just saying you can do that, but that doesn't make the data say what you want it to say. It says what you want it to say because that's how you're interpreting it, and I can interpret it differently, right?
sure. You know what I would say also? I think whenever you start running into these kinds of problems, it's important to recognize that like data and all of those things are important, but when you start going into social like social descriptions, I think it's probably best. I mean, yes, the data is important, but I think there's some things that we all just know. We all kind of know intuitively. We all know empirically, and I would say that this is one of those things. I think most people, you yourself included, recognize that there is a reluctance for society because of their infantilization and their empathetic driven motives towards women, or empathetic driven attitudes towards women, that they're going to be less likely or less willing to hold women accountable. I don't think that this is really like some sort of like controversial statement because these are
that
things that we already all
society that
know.
society is, yes, and I've agreed with you on that, but then you make the leap and say
Yes.
therefore women are also X, Y, and Z, and that's where I'm like, no dude, that
I
doesn't
got
that
you. And
doesn't follow.
I think again, and I don't think it's a really unfounded leap to say that if we have an entire society that creates a social environment of a given way, that women are going to probably develop a proclivity towards that environment, which is going to display itself by a lack of accountability. Because if the environment is not to hold women accountable, I think it's completely reasonable to say that women are then going to stop being holding themselves accountable too, because the environment created that culture around them. In the same sense, to where
And
we could say
I
if there's like a highly criminal culture, like then we could say people developed in a highly criminal culture are likely to be more criminally inclined, right? This is why you can
so
take people going into
would you be fine with me making a statement like saying that men are generally rapier?
probably not,
Why not?
because rape isn't a normative outcome for within males. You would never
But
want to could
being not accountable is
yes.
for women?
Yes, because here's
Oh,
yeah, I got you. I got you. I'm sorry. I get it. That you feel like that this doesn't make any sense. I'm going to help you get it really quickly. It's really simple. When you want to start looking at normative outcomes, then you can start saying like they are this. This is what's happening. Something like rape is only practiced by the super duper hyper minority in society. It's not like 50%, 20%, 30% of men rape. Rape is carried out by a very 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 hyper minority. Right. The average man doesn't rape. So then, yes, while you can say men are more rapey than women, you can make that statement. It's not a normative thing. Whereas when it comes to something like an entirely pervasive, as you stated, pervasive societal, like empathetic leaning towards women, such that they're not infantilizing them, then it seems like if this is something that the entire society is doing, then it would make sense that not just a few bad apples, but maybe women in general would probably
okay.
develop these sort of attitudes. That's why these things are incredibly different. One's normative and one's
Okay.
not.
So I've got it. Um, so our disagreement basically lies in the fact that so I thought we agreed more than we do. Um, because you're saying if society treats women like this, therefore there's like a causality there. And because I deny that causality, then I guess I would argue that it's not a women's thing and it's just like people are generally not all people are very good at taking accountability. So I'd have to like roll back what I said, basically. Well, no, not really, because I was making societal prescriptions. Yeah. So I would have to default back to my original argument that I think that like the ability to take account for things and be accountable for things is an individual trait, and it wouldn't necessarily be unevenly distributed across gender lines. If you're going to argue that like not being accountable is a normative trait for women, then yeah, I can't support that.
Okay, then I guess I guess the disagreement was a lot larger than we thought. But I mean,
Yay!
we got
We
there.
solved it.